evening, everybody. This is not Phreology Friday. We are the Gnostic Agnostics. That's who we are now. That's what we're calling ourselves, and that's our story, and we're sticking to it. I'm Derek Day, the Gnostic Stoic / humanist, and he is.
I am Aaron Tomlinson, the Gnostic / mystic / I don't know. I have to come up with something.
Metaphysician.
Metaphysician. Yeah, I like
There you
that. Yeah, I'm Aaron Tomlinson, the Gnostic / mystic / metaphysician. I love that.
It's great to be here. Great to see you this week, Aaron. And I don't know if we're carrying over some of the Phreology legacy, but I'm drinking wine. I'm drinking Merlot. So
right on. Yeah, I am drinking. So this is chili infused vodka. It's a Bloody Mary.
Okay.
With chili infused vodka and clamato. That's it.
Nice.
Yeah. I've really gotten hooked on clamato lately, which I know probably isn't the best for me, but
well, you know what? Clamato is not horrible. It's like really just the high fructose corn syrup. But you can beat that because we talked about that in a previous episode that you can use clam juice.
Yeah.
And get the get the clam infusion.
I've tried it, Derek, but I just don't have the right recipe yet, I guess.
Yeah, well, you have to kind of work on it. It's like the tomato juice, and I would recommend using pure tomato juice and not V8, right? Because V8 the flavor's a little off.
Right.
But use pure tomato juice and then add some clam broth and some Worcestershire sauce. I think that's where the magic happens.
Right. I will try that. Yep. Maybe next time. So
I'm going to give it a go too, because I've tried it with just the clam broth, and for me that's good enough. But some people, they like that sweet back end. So
Yeah. I didn't think I would, but I don't know, man. It's just I'm like craving it. It's weird.
I know it's crazy, but that's how they get us, man. They have us addicted to sugar.
They do. They totally do. I agree. I think I sent you some a while back, or maybe I didn't send it to you, but like foods and things that give you a dopamine hit, right? And they're all the shit that's bad for you, like Cheetos and all this processed garbage. Of course you get a dopamine hit. And then things that don't give you a dopamine hit, things like broccoli, things like Brussels
carrots,
things like all the good. I'm like, why? What is this?
It's really messed up, but like in this fitness journey that I've been on, I've really changed my relationship with food. And I mean, it's just some things like like pasta and bread, right? We had on-site work meetings last week, for 3 days, and so they had catered food. And for some reason that, Italian is like the lowest common denominator for consultant chow, right?
Sure.
So everything's pasta. And I'm like, okay, well, I got to eat, So I ate. And the funny thing is that I felt different.
Interesting.
It's like having not eaten pasta for the better part of 6 months and then suddenly eating it again. It's like my body kind of went into a little bit of shock.
Yeah.
So
I can imagine. Yeah. I'm back up to 200. I'm disappointed to say. My goal is 185, but I was down to 192, and then it was just all uphill from there.
Bro, listen, I understand, because it's like right now I'm at 218, and when I went to have my physical, I was like at 216. And that's at the doctor, so I know it's like pretty accurate.
Sure.
Hang on for a second.
Yeah, I think 218 is about what I was at your wedding.
Yeah. So I'm trying. My goal is 195, and I'm sticking to that goal. If I get there, it's great. If I get close, that's okay. But I'm really doggedly determined to get there. And how I'm going to get there is not by wishing and a hoping and a praying.
Come on, you can't pray the calories away.
But no, you cannot. And I'm gonna tell you, just as a matter of fact, that if you look it up, that obesity is more prevalent around Christians than it is any other spiritual.
No, I believe that. I believe that because they're repressing every other bodily urge.
Yeah. So
that's the only one that's legitimate.
I specifically distinguish between, hoping and a wishing and a praying and knowing, because now I'm taking a scientific approach. We're talking about Gnosticism.
Yeah. So Derek, a few people that I mentioned to, that we were doing this tonight, and they're like, well, I thought you weren't doing Freeology Friday anymore. So do you want to explain a little bit about what we're doing and why we're doing it, maybe?
Yeah, that's a great point, Aaron. We are not doing Freeology Friday anymore. I won't say never, because in the words of James Bond, never say never again. But what we're doing here is we want to take a deep dive into Gnosticism, because I think that Gnosticism is Christianity's forgotten child.
Yeah.
Or let's say that Gnosticism is Christianity's unknown parent.
Oh, I like that even better.
Let's say that, that it's not an absentee parent because it's a deadbeat parent. That's not the case. It was forced out.
Mm-hmm.
How can I say this it's like forced out by family. In other words, like the family of one spouse denies contact to the kids by the other spouse.
Yeah, I like that.
It's like a bitter divorce with a shitty custody outcome. That's kind of, if I could use that as a description. Sure. Because and the reason why I say this, right, why it may be Christianity's parent, is because if we set the Wayback Machine to the 1st century,
yeah,
and I wish I had a sound effect for that, but if we set the Wayback Machine like Peabody and Sherman back to the 1st century CE or AD, if you're into that, that what happened was there were many flavors of Christianity. And when I'm talking about many flavors of Christianity, I'm talking about things that were really different.
Mm-hmm.
Not just how we have 42,000 denominations where everything is a nuance of another denomination. No, right. I'm talking about some things that are really different. And so gnosis, which gnosis is the root of Gnosticism. Gnosis is a word it's a Greek word meaning inner knowledge or hidden knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so the prevailing flavor of Christianity in the 1st century, and this is according to theological scholars, which I say that in the most generous way, according to them, that Gnosticism was the prevailing flavor of Christianity at that time, and was the prevailing flavor of Christianity for nearly 2 centuries post-resurrection. And there's a real point there, is a pivot there, because Gnosticism does not believe in the resurrection. They don't believe in the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, and the risen Christ is not a touchstone in Gnosticism.
Correct.
So, when you talk about Gnosticism, we're talking about spiritual awakening. We're talking about the divine spark. We're talking about, and here's the thing, we might piss some people off because Gnosticism deals with things in a very dualistic way, because you have spirit and you have matter. And there's some really key distinctions that come up there, and we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about some of the characters, because in addition to Jesus and the 12, you also have who Jesus referred to as the God of this world,
Right.
which is the demiurge,
Right.
and his henchmen, the archons. And so we're going to unpack a lot of this over the course of however many weeks, months, years we do this, and we'll do this until until people see it. And one of the things that I love about phreology, what we accomplished in 5 years, I would say literally, Aaron, there are thousands of people, literally thousands of people that say, I saw something different because of what you guys share.
Yep.
And one of the things that why we talked about coming to this and diving into this, because if you say that you are a Christian but you have no historical perspective of Christianity, then you are underserved by your faith.
Yeah.
You really don't know.
Yeah.
And the more, and this is the thing about Gnosticism, because it's based on knowledge, it's like the more you know, the more you grow. The more you know, the better you become. So I've said, we had talked about this before, and I said, if we could use a tagline with this, I would say the Gnostic agnostics, a better way to Christian.
Yeah, I like that.
and let me just say this: I'm not trying. Some of my atheist friends are going to be like, "Oh, you're going back to Christianity?" No, I'm not. No, I'm not, because I really believe that Gnosticism is different than Christianity. I think that if you really want to get down to the root of what Jesus was about as a person, assuming that he was a true historical character, and even if he's like sort of a composite character or a myth, that there's this knowledge, and this knowledge is still valuable. I don't want to discredit or undermine that knowledge, because this knowledge is important, because the first thing about gnosis is inner knowledge.
Yep.
Getting to know you. And we've talked about that a lot on phreology, man. It's like, if you don't know you, if you don't love you, you can't love anybody else. It's impossible. If you don't know you, you can't know anyone else. It's impossible. And so what happens is that Christianity in its modern form produces a kind of Don Quixote effect, where everybody's tilting against the windmill of spirituality. And basically what they're doing is they're on a hamster wheel with no escape. And at the end of the day, when you're talking about knowledge, see, when you talk about faith, faith is unbounded. It has no guardrails, right? And also, faith is not falsifiable. You can't say, if you say, okay, faith cannot be tested, therefore it can't be trusted. Your M1A1 Christian is going to come back and say, well, you just have to have faith, or you just have to believe, or you haven't studied enough. In other words, your falsification is dismissed summarily. And this is something that I've said. I said that whatever cannot be falsified is false by definition. So what I want to do, and I'm hoping that, Aaron, you're on board with this, is that, if we double click, unpack, open up, unfold this whole thing about gnosis, I'm thinking that there are going to be some people that are going to be set free from religious dogma, churchism, and a whole bunch of other stuff that I really think holds humanity back. And what's going to happen is that here's the thing, that when you begin to look inward and find things in you, it makes you want to look outward and find things that are outside of you. It's like one knowledge, basically your inner knowledge becomes the kindling for your external knowledge. Right. So what we're doing here is we're trying to help you rediscover the divine spark. that which is in you that will help you live this life better. Because the other thing too about Gnosticism is that Gnosticism doesn't give a fuck about the afterlife, right? It's what are you doing?
Not a lot in there for sure.
What's that?
I just saying there's not a lot in there in the
No.
writings about that for sure.
No, because the afterlife doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, you really don't know what's on the other side. And the funny thing is that that Jesus, even in the mainstream gospels, doesn't really talk a lot about the afterlife.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So it tracks with Gnosticism that he wouldn't talk about it here either, because that was not his bag. The afterlife really was a Pauline thing, and that gets back to one of my pet phrases is that most people that when they if they were going to be intellectually honest are not really, most Christians are not Christians, they're Paulians.
I have a different take on Paul than most people.
Okay, I know you
have
do.
a different take on everything than most people when it comes to.
I mean, I know you see Paul as a mystic and maybe even possibly Gnostic, and we're going to be drilling into that too.
Yeah, I think with Paul, just as a side note, I think, one of the things we're going to do is bring out a lot of education, because there's a lot of stuff even among people that are deconstructing or shit canning their faith and Christianity and stuff like that. They'll make statements and I'll cringe because they're completely 100% inaccurate. And the reason they're making these inaccurate statements is because there is no education really about the history of this stuff and how it can be. I'll give you a good example. And you may push back on this, but hear me out.
Yep.
Let me finish.
Yep.
People will say that the Bible was constructed in order to control people.
Yep.
I agree on certain aspects of that, particularly the fact that, I hate to say this like this, but that the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament, seems to have been written by King Josiah's scribes.
Yeah.
And the goal very clearly, historically, seems to be to consolidate power in Jerusalem, right?
Yep.
So certainly there was a lot of controlling elements to that. But I think it's important to understand that the Bible did not become, even good translations didn't even get into the West until the Renaissance.
Correct.
And the Bible did not become an authority until Martin Luther. So what happens is all they had was these Latin translations, these really bad translations, and they were formulating their doctrines through the councils. The power was in the Catholic Church. The control was in the Catholic Church. The intention was never for it to reside in a book. The book just kind of came to be, right? Because people were illiterate. You didn't have the printing press. It had to be copied by hand. And so maybe, I'm throwing out an arbitrary number here, but maybe 1 in 10 churches around, Europe had an actual Bible, had an actual copy of it, right?
Yep.
But what they did have was they had this power structure of bishops. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself because I know we're going to touch on this later. But if that's okay, I'm just going to go with it.
Go for it, man.
You had this power structure of bishops. And essentially what I think is that Constantine, we can come back and unpack some of this. I think Constantine was really looking for a way to unify the empire in a religious sense.
Yeah.
And what was appealing, I think, to him about Christianity was by this time, it was not ethnic. It was based on faith, whereas most religious worship and stuff prior to that was based on your ethnicity, who your parents and grandparents and ancestors worshipped and all this stuff, right? But the power was through the people, it was through the bishops, it was through the priests, it was through the structure of the church itself. It wasn't in the book, it wasn't in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so what happened was in the West, there was all these, they only had Latin translations. They didn't have Greek translations. They certainly didn't have Hebrew or Aramaic translations. And so at some point prior to the Reformation, these Greek texts get translated into it gets into the hands of people so they can read the Greek and they say, hey, wait a minute, what we're reading in these texts is completely different than what the doctrines that are being imposed on us by the Catholic Church. And so that's how Martin Luther came up with this idea of sola scriptura. In other words, this book, the writings that we have from about Christianity, from Paul and from, you know, what they believed at the time to be the apostles, this doesn't support your teachings or your doctrines. So if this doesn't support your teachings or your doctrines, then we don't need the church. And so the elevation of the Bible was the exact opposite of control. It was, if you think about it in its time period, what was going on, if you think about freedom from religious control as being progressive through generations, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then the reformers were the demons. They were the rebels. They were the liberators, and they were using the scripture in order to do that. But even at that, the Bible didn't become this thing that was the inerrant word of God until a couple of centuries later. And in fact, it didn't even become codified until the 1970s. Yeah. So it just drives me a little nuts when people say, well, the Bible is just written to control people, because that's absolutely not true. The Catholic Church was controlling people, yeah, and the Bible was there really as a, I don't know.
Well, you know, the Bible was like, they would have these relics. You know, they would have a skull, and they say this is the skull of St. Peter, right? And they have it in the cathedral, and they say, okay, this is the symbol of our authority. Having a relic was something so they had a touchstone. So when you had a Bible actually in a cathedral, that was considered to be a relic as well. And so there was a certain amount of veneration and worship that was assigned to it. And I understand what your point is when you say the Bible wasn't written for the purpose of manipulation, control, and I'll concede that point, but I'll say that it became a tool of manipulation and
Absolutely.
control.
But yeah, it's been weaponized.
Yeah, it's been weaponized.
People will say, you know, like the Bible, they have this idea it was created at the Council of Nicaea, which is completely false.
Well, here's the thing. The canonization, I think, was a tool of manipulation and control, because they put what in there. They put in there what they knew could be used, that could be weaponized. In other words, they built the payload in canonization.
Yeah, I see it a little bit differently. I think they were. I think the problem with Gnosticism was it was too liberating.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they picked gospels that supported apostolic succession, yep, which is where the bishops and the priests were drawing their authority from. In other words, we have authority because we have this lineage that goes all the way back to Peter, the apostle, specifically, right?
Right.
And because he was given the keys of the kingdom, and he's the foundation of the church.
Yeah.
And so they built this organization based on the concept of apostolic succession. So they picked gospels that supported apostolic succession.
Correct.
But also in doing that, it was to eradicate these Gnostic texts,
yep,
that we're talking about, because the Gnostic texts were like, you don't need the church, you don't need a priest, you don't need to go between. If you're a woman, you can also have access to this knowledge, because at the end of the day, it's like you said, it's an internal knowledge of the divine, rather than something that, like the Catholic Church is saying, if you want to find God, you want to find salvation, you have to come through us.
Correct.
You have to be baptized, you have to take the sacraments and stuff like that. And so, yeah, it'll be fun to unpack some of this stuff, because I think there's a lot more to the story than the oversimplified versions that we get from pissed off people that are just trying to kick religion in the nuts.
and that's the thing too. Like I'm one of these people. I personally enjoy kicking religion in the nuts.
No, I know you do.
But here's the thing. I don't enjoy doing it just for the sake of doing it. Because, you know, you had said something in a post earlier this week that it would be great if people would talk about what they're for instead of what they're against, right? And so what I'm for is logic, reason,
right,
humanism. In other words, how can we have a quote unquote theology when we don't even have a good anthropology? We don't have a good relationship with humanity. So how do we expect to elevate some level of relationship with God?
Yeah.
And so my thing is, and understand this, and I'm going to piss off some of my atheist friends with this. Honestly, I don't care what people believe. If you believe in Jesus, if you believe in the risen Jesus, if you believe in the sacraments, if you believe in, Paul, and if you believe in any of that, great. It's fine as long as it's local. Because belief is something that I think is best kept local.
Mm.
The problem is that when people try to export that belief beyond the borders of themselves, and then they get into a sort of imperialism where if you don't believe like me, I'm not going to interface with you. I'm not going to trade in the marketplace of ideas with you. Right. So what I'm saying is okay, let's let our mode of communication, our mode of interface with each other be something that's not based on what we believe, but based on what we can, what is tangible, measurable, and repeatable. And this is not to discount anybody's spiritual experience. It's like I was debating with a guy in a group earlier this week, and he said, "Well, I met God. And I'm like, dude, if you believe you met God, who am I to argue? I can't argue with that. But what I can say is that you have no right to demand that I believe that you saw God.
Right.
And you certainly have no right to believe that the fact that you saw God makes you some authority and make you able to control anything beyond the borders of yourself.
Right.
So I have no problem with faith. I have a huge problem with weaponized faith.
Yeah,
I don't have a problem with the Bible. Well, I do, but that's another story. But I have a problem with a weaponized Bible.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with church. This is a thing. And I said this. I was having a conversation. I had this conversation with Maya, and I also had it with some other people a couple of weeks ago. That when you look at megachurches are not there to do great things for the community. They're there for the express purpose of amassing power.
Yeah.
Financial and political power, because once you have financial power, you have money power, you can get political power. When you get political power, you could change things. You could change zoning ordinances, and you can decide what kind of businesses will be permitted. You get to decide, what the agenda of the local government will be and things like that. And you push this all the way up the food chain, and you get to determine who gets to sit on the Supreme Court. And that's a problem. So I think what Gnosticism will do is it will undo some of these power structures and put the power back where it belongs, in the hands of individuals. And
totally agree. I totally agree. Just real quick, my post was nuanced, but a lot of people missed it. The one you were referring to, I said sometimes it's better to focus on what you're for than what you're against. That doesn't mean, and some people took that to say, well, we need to they came back, well, we have to talk about what we're against. I didn't say don't. No. I didn't say don't talk about what we're against. But
even if you said, even if you didn't nuance, it's still
it can become very subtle to where we're stuck in this thing that psychologists call a reaction formation, where we're just reacting to what we're against, and we forget about the bigger picture of what it is that we're for. So when I'm listening to you talk, Derek, what I'm hearing from you is, I'm against the weaponization and exportation of faith for the purpose of exploitation. And I agree 1,000% with that, right? But you also affirm what you're for. I'm for the individual. I'm for humanity. I'm for freedom.
Yep.
That's Freeology Friday. That's how the whole that was the whole thing, right? Was individual freedom. I'm for the individual.
Yep.
And so what I think it's interesting, because I was and we may be bouncing all over the place too much. Forgive me if I am, but
no, it's okay, man.
I was being interviewed in a recent podcast, and because I'm your buddy, they assumed I was this hardcore atheist, that was going to come on and and it became, I won't go into all the details, but it's pretty funny because they're like, they didn't get it all what they thought with me. And then I'm like thinking to myself, well, never mind what I'm thinking to myself, but it was a really good question because somehow the idea of reinterpreting scripture, looking at it as metaphor, looking at it as Joseph Campbell's definition of myth, something that speaks to your potentials. And it was a good question. He said, aren't you afraid that if you teach the Bible from that perspective, that people that get hooked into that perspective will eventually end up in fundamentalism and we'll have another generation of fundamentalists? And I thought that was a great question. My take on it is different, though. My take is, like, what generation are you living in? Like, did you watch the last election?
Yeah.
Like I think it's too early to worry about like just because you shit can fundamentalism, it's as stronger than ever. So I think that there are sincere people. I think there are many sincere people that are looking for answers in life, that believe in God, that are spiritual and looking for spirituality. And the only thing that they really have available to them in our culture is new age stuff that's way out there and too far out there for some people. They're not going to get into crystals. They're not going to get into reading tarot cards. They're not going to, get into, I don't know, some of the stuff that's out there, or Orthodox / fundamentalist Christianity, right? And so what I think Gnosticism can do is it can provide a pathway forward for people who are wired more towards the right hemisphere of their brain than the left hemisphere. You're very left hemisphere leaning.
Yep.
Logic, reason, linear thought, evidence, all that stuff. Not everybody's like that. I tend to be, I can come across very left brain, but I tend to be more right brained, right?
Yep.
And so a lot of right brain people they're looking for something. And I think that Gnosticism provides them with a healthier alternative and allows them to escape the matrix of weaponized religion.
Right.
And like you said, discover stuff that's in them that they never even knew was there to begin with. So that's why I think it's important.
Yep. And this is the thing, I hate to use this as an example, but I'm going to use it as an example because, as you know, I drive a Tesla, right? And one of the cool things about the Tesla is that you can get things, an entire change in the operation of your car through a software download.
Right.
Why? Because everything that they figured you need, they built it into the car already. There are things that are built into a Tesla that the software really hasn't caught up to yet.
Right.
And so like now I have the full self-driving, and the full self-driving doesn't mandate that you touch the steering wheel. So as long as the interior camera sees your eyes,
right,
and sees that they're looking ahead, the artificial intelligence of the car says, hey, everything's cool. I can just keep on driving. And I have driven literally from Texas to Oklahoma and back, letting the car drive. What am I getting at? Is that we are equipped from the factory with every possible option. All we need is a download and an instruction, and there are things that we'll be able to do. There's this old adage is that we only use 5% of our brain, which they've proven that that's not true.
Completely false, yeah.
Totally false. But there are areas of the brain that for some reason or the other, they lie dormant. They're not as active as other parts of the brain. What does this mean? Do we have the ability for telekinesis, telepathy? Do we have parapsychological ability?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, maybe, or let's say, astral projection, remote viewing. We could have all of this, but we haven't gotten the right download. We haven't downloaded the right software to activate the hardware.
So this is where I'm gonna say I think there is also aspects of scientism to differentiate it from actual science.
Yep, come on.
It is also weaponized and designed to keep people under control. Because this is something I've taken a deep dive in the last couple of years. There is a lot of research on paranormal, parapsychological phenomenon and abilities and things that human beings have. But this interesting statistic that I came across, and I trust the source, is interesting, Derek. From like 1890 or whatever, when they first started doing research into parapsychology, until today, the entire budget that has been spent on exploring those aspects of humanity and human consciousness is 2 months worth. Listen to this. The entire budget from 1890 till now, the money spent is 2 months worth of just psychological research alone. That doesn't even count all the other scientific research that's going on. Just so in a whole year, 2 months of what's spent in a year on psychological research is the entire budget ever that's been spent
for over 100
psychological research. Now, why is that? Because I think there is an agenda, whether it's a demiurge, whether it's archons, or whether it's just an aspect of human nature that the Gnostics picked up on and used metaphors to describe, or used their understanding of the cosmos to describe. But I do think there's an agenda by those in power to prevent humanity from really discovering who we are. I really genuinely believe that. And I think we see that in religion. And I think that the academies and scientism is a bedfellow in that.
Yep.
And I think it's just a shame. So, yeah, it's not just religion that is controlling people and weaponizing things and hindering people from making progress. It's not.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. It's like when you talk about scientism, and let me just say this, that again, belief in anything, belief, faith, in anything is fine, as long as it's local. But when you scale it out and say this is something that everybody should adhere to, and it doesn't matter whether that is Christianity, whether that is Islam, whether that is Judaism, whether that is scientism, whether that is secular humanism. When you build something around this and say, okay, this is a belief that I have. When you're saying that I have a belief, you're saying I really don't have any empirical evidence to support this. I just have faith, and that's fine if it's local. But when you demand that kind of faith from a broader audience, when you demand that faith in a global sense, and I'm with you 100%. Like there is a religion of scientism or sciencism. I don't know which one it would be.
I say scientism, but
okay. But that's definitely a religion, because there is a structure, there is a hierarchy, there is a code to it, right? And when you assign that to it, then it becomes religion, right? And so one of the things I want to talk about is, how do we even know about Gnosticism, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that how we even know about Gnosticism is a grand fucking accident. Because when you think about
it's a grand fucking plan, but go ahead.
Okay, well,
we differ in our worldviews, but go ahead.
Well, so this is why I think it's an accident, and I want to hear why you think it's a plan.
Sure.
Because
of course.
This is something that this is what we're going to do. So for those of you who are listening, Aaron and I, we don't agree on everything. Contrary to popular belief, he is like, beside my wife, my best friend, right? And we talk about everything, but we don't agree on everything. And so there's going to be some back and forth on this, and I want you guys to just kind of fix your minds for that. But when I think about this, like there are books that are referred to in the Bible that are not in the Bible,
right?
And so when we look at those, we say, okay, where are these books? And so you'll find things in the Apocrypha, which are largely Old Testament texts that, for whatever reason, wound up on the cutting room floor. Some of which are canonized in the Catholic Bible, and some in the Orthodox Bible, but not in the Western Bible. That is the Protestant Bible. But you had these things like the Dead Sea Scrolls that showed up, which the Dead Sea Scrolls kind of gave a different color or interpretation of Old Testament texts, not really so much on the New Testament. But where the New Testament got interesting was in the 1940s when they found the Nag Hammadi library in Egypt. Mm-hmm. Because in the Nag Hammadi, we found other gospels. And these are gospels that were referred to in Christian texts in either Orthodox or apocryphal texts. They were referred to by church fathers. They have been referred to by people like Origen and Augustine. So we knew that these things existed at some point, but we never saw them. But then we got the Nag Hammadi. Now we're able to look at this in real relief, mm-hmm. and look at what these texts actually said. And so some of the things that came out of the Nag Hammadi were like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary, and the Gospel of Judas, which to me, out of all the Gnostic books, and one of the things I'm looking forward to is doing an entire show on the Gospel of Judas, because a lot of characters who the Bible cast as villains weren't really. Mm-hmm. And then also what they call the Pistis Sophia, right? That was another thing that, and I don't think that was part of the Nag Hammadi. I think that was discovered in another unearthing. But all of these things deal with Jesus not as Savior, not as necessarily the Son of God, but as an archetypal human. In other words, he was the best authentic version of humanity. Now, here's the other interesting thing is, I think it's in the Gospel of Thomas, where it talks about the child Jesus, mm-hmm. and things that Jesus did as a child, that he struck down other kids, and Mary had to kind of get at him and say, hey, raise that kid from the dead. That he was making birds out of clay and all kinds, just stuff like that. And some of that, to me, I think that it adds color to the Gospels, because it gives you some insight into what this Jesus's personality really was. But it also gives you some color as to, for example, Jesus was never commanding of worship in the canonical Gospels. That was not his thing. What he was trying to tell everyone is that, when he came down from the Mount of Transfiguration, when at the Mount of Transfiguration, Peter and John were like, oh, we need to build tabernacles to this, to these guys and worship them. And Jesus is like, no, that's not what's going on here. I'm just showing you some authority that I've been vested with, and why what I say matters. And then they come down from the Mount of Transfiguration, and they deal with this boy that's throwing himself into the fire. Mm-hmm. And what does Jesus do? He chides the disciples because they didn't fix the problem.
Right.
You guys have been with me. The same thing when they're crossing the sea, and the boat is being tossed to and fro, and these guys are fishermen. They knew what the sea's behavior was, mm-hmm. but this was something that clearly took them out of their element. But so they're like, Jesus, don't you care? We're gonna die. Mm-hmm. And Jesus is like, look, How long am I going to have to deal with you, faithless generation? Peace be still. In other words, this is what I'm doing, you could have done.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll go to another one, and again, this is why these Gnostic gospels are so important, because people, like when Jesus fed the multitudes, he preached all day, sunset's coming, and the disciples say, look, Jesus, we done took these people all out into the country. We need to feed these folks. And Jesus is like, well, what do you have? What do you have?
Mm-hmm.
They said, well, got this little boy here, he's got a 2-piece fish dinner. And Jesus is like, okay, and said he took he took the lad's food, he blessed it, and he broke it, and he began to pass it out. Now, where was the miracle? The miracle was not in Jesus blessing and breaking the bread. It wasn't even the disciples taking the bread and passing it on. This was 5,000 men, because that was all that was counted.
Right.
The women and children weren't counted, and there were some of these men that were polygamous. They had multiple families.
Mm-hmm.
So it could have been as many as 50,000 people there. The miracle was in that this blessing and breaking of the food, of the bread and the fish, didn't just happen with Jesus, didn't just happen with disciples. It had to happen with hundreds, maybe thousands of people that were doing this. And so that's why I think that the Gnostic texts are so important, because it will show us what Jesus was trying to show, what was in him, and impart that to what is in us.
Yeah.
Okay. So
that's a good segue into, like, what's the difference between Gnosticism, Gnostic Christianity, we could call it maybe, and orthodoxy or Orthodox Christianity. And the biggest differences that I see, obviously, Gnosticism is personal. Okay, I'm going to back up. Part of my frustration right now, I'm really frustrated with this, just in my personal life when I'm communicating and talking to people, not just online. The vast majority of what I do is not online, right? So, but it is so deeply ingrained in people, this sinful redemption spirituality that I've talked about, that they can't separate any belief in God or a higher power from the concept of sinful and forgiveness. So any language that you use that is similar automatically gets understood as though it's the same. It may be similar, but it's not the same, right? But people will hear it as though it is the same thing. And so to me, it's a crazy idea. And I know, most people watching this share this, but it's a crazy idea that, I don't know, God put 2 naked vegans in the garden, they talked to a snake and fucked everything up for the rest of us. And God's figuring, had to figure out how to fix that by killing his son.
Yeah.
And then the whole purpose of life, I guess, is to get the history lesson right? Because if you believe in Jesus, that he raised from the dead, if you believe that's a historical fact and you believe it in your heart, then you shall be saved. That doesn't make any sense.
No,
that doesn't make any sense at all, right? But that's, I think, when we're talking about institutionalized salvation, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so Gnosticism was more, it's salvation in a different term. The term may be similar, but it's definitely not the same, right? So it's I'm thinking about, like, that verse in the Gospel of Thomas that talks about, if you bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will save you. If you do not bring it forth, then there's no saving power in it. So, but saved from what, right? So I think that's the question. And from the Gnostic perspective, this salvation would be more from ignorance, right? It would be more from,
man, you're reading my fucking mind.
It's a salvation from ignorance that connects you to the deepest parts of who you are, so you can have the fullest expression of who you are, and as a byproduct of that, have the fullest life that you can possibly live.
Right.
So it's very individualized. And it's looking within, not looking into an institution or looking without to a savior in order to save you or to deliver you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it emphasizes the indwelling of divine consciousness, that the divine is in you, that the divine spark is in you, that you find God inside of you in a unique way with a unique expression, rather than looking to some God in the sky somewhere that's going to, I don't know. I mean, really, like, I had an interesting talk with my wife this week because I'm really coming back around to a deeper faith in God, in spirit, in spirituality than I've had in years. And some of that, a lot of that is because my life has just been different, right? Now, my wife was raised in the church. She went to Bible college. And then she met and married me, and I don't know, the verdict is still out whether or not she thinks that was a good decision. Still, I think that's still to be determined. But so she's able to speak to, this is what she really helped me understand. She's like, you're very, very different. Like, this is what most people's experience is. And she shared some things about that essentially boils down to you pray and you hope somebody's listening and you feel better because you kind of got it off your chest, but you could probably get the same feeling if you talk to a friend or talk to a therapist, right? So even though people may cling to faith, most people are practical atheists. They may be believers in name, they may be believers in their minds, but their lives are lived as though God does not exist at all.
Yeah.
So they're essentially practical atheists, right? Whereas my experience was based on very deeply powerful, deeply transformative personal experiences or gnosis, right? Yeah. So I think more than likely, I just stumbled into Gnosticism somehow, maybe because I didn't, I hate this term, find God, but we're limited by language. I didn't find God in the church, and we always emphasized to everyone to look within. The well of water, Jesus said in John chapter 4, is within you that quenches your thirst. Out of your innermost being will flow rivers of living water. Paul said, Christ in you is the hope of glory. John said, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Paul said, if you are joined to the Lord, you're one spirit with the Lord. And so, but that message is just completely and totally lost in favor of, get your history lesson right, make sure you pray right, make sure you're baptized right, whatever. And then, but I mean, so like the idea for most Christians is that there's this God in the sky, not even there to answer prayers. That's the point I was trying to get to. He's not even there to answer prayers. He's there to monitor your lifestyle, particularly your sexual habits, monitor your thoughts, particularly your sexual ones.
Yeah, God has this strange obsession with dildos, but go ahead.
And then even if you get your history lesson right and you get saved, I don't know, like you're going to give account for every word you said,
every idle word.
Yeah, every thing you ever did. And you get this idea. I think most Christians have this idea that like half of eternity, if you could split eternity in half of eternity is going to be every individual that ever lived in this giant stadium with this giant drive-in movie screen, and you're going to be forced to watch all their sexual fetishes.
Porn! Porn in heaven!
For half of eternity.
Half of the time,
none of that is in Gnosticism. None of that is in Gnosticism.
Half of the time will be spent watching other people's porn, right?
Yeah,
and the other half will be watching everybody burn in hell. Hey, come on over here. Let's go over here to the overlook and look down in hell and see all those fuckers that didn't believe burn.
Yeah, so I mean, none of that exists within the Gnostic framework. That's my point.
Yep. and that, this is, so there are a couple of things about Gnosticism, and I wanted to
Sure.
the difference between Gnosticism and Christianity, and one of the things, personal salvation versus institutional salvation. Now, and again, when you talk about salvation, saved from what, right? And so when you're talking about personal salvation, it's like, what can I be saved from my own thoughts? Can I be saved from less authentic or less reliable versions of myself? In
Yeah.
other words, can I be saved from me? Because at the end of the day, I'm the only one that is really going to allow whether I'm harmed or not, right? Versus institutional salvation, where you say, okay, if you believe, accept, and receive.
Yeah.
Or, what they said, the faith ABCs: accept, believe, and confess.
Yeah.
Right. So that's, one of the differences between Gnosticism and Christianity. In other words, it's like, how can I save myself from myself?
Right.
That's a big tenet of Gnosticism. The other one is God within versus God above.
Correct.
This whole bearded white guy in the sky, who's gonna answer your prayers and abide with you in the sweet by and by. And it's like, why are you investing so much into something that you really don't know anything about, versus investing some time and effort into what you know? Because what we know is what we experience right now.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the most, like, this is Rene Descartes, right? The most undeniable truth. If you can't know anything at all, you can know that you exist.
Yeah.
Like that
therefore I am.
Completely irrefutable, right?
Yep.
So we've talked about this a lot. You did a really good video. I think I watched all of it and we've talked about it on the show, but the difference between hypothesis and theory and stuff like that. So true science, as opposed to scientism, is always growing and expanding and updating and revising and all of that really, really good stuff, right?
Yeah.
Which means then that we don't get the full picture ever, right? Like, it's constantly updating, it's constantly changing. But the one thing that is consistent throughout your life is you.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, you only know what you know.
Right.
You don't know everything.
Nope.
I mean, and basic example of this, like if I tell you about a conversation I had today with my friend Jerry, well, I'm assuming nobody on here knows Jerry, right?
Yeah.
So you could say Jerry doesn't exist. And you would be right, because to you and in your world, Jerry does not exist. Jerry does not exist at all, right?
Right.
There is people that know a shit ton more about all kinds of every topic out there than what I know or what you and I know put together, right?
Yep.
So at the end of the day, what they know has, unless they invent something crazy that transforms the world, like the microprocessor or the cellular phone or artificial intelligence or quantum computers or something like that, at the end of the day, that knowledge is completely and totally meaningless to us.
Right.
And like me, you have to go to the hospital, and then you're really glad that there are people that know a shit ton more about what to do with you in that situation than what you know. At least most of us, I think, still feel that way. I don't know. You know what I mean? But otherwise, that knowledge is completely irrelevant to you. It's as though it doesn't exist, because the only thing you can know is you. So this is where, Rene Descartes and some others, the dictum, I think, therefore I am. Basically what Descartes was saying was, if you can't know anything else, if you can't trust anything else, the one thing that is not falsifiable, right, Derek? The one thing that is not falsifiable is that you exist, at least to yourself. It's not falsifiable, because even if you were falsifying it, there would be a you falsifying it.
Well, here's the thing: is that your existence is indeed falsifiable. Someone can say that you don't exist,
But not
and,
to you. You cannot, you absolutely cannot falsify your own existence to
no,
yourself. Other people,
no, you can't falsify your own
that's my
existence. You're
point.
correct.
That's the point I'm making.
You're correct. Absolutely correct.
So the point is, get to know that.
Yeah.
Get to know that. Discover everything you can about that.
Which that takes me to my next point is the difference between Gnosticism and Christianity is knowledge versus obedience. Because Christianity makes its bones on obedience. Obedience is better than sacrifice. Isn't that what we were taught? Isn't that what we once preached?
Yeah.
You know,
Oh yeah.
obedience is better than sacrifice. That the reason why Saul lost the kingdom is because he chose to sacrifice instead of being obedient.
Yeah.
But the Gnostic Jesus only talks about knowledge. He's never talking about following a set of precepts.
It's a really good point.
Never talking about, that these are the rules, and guys, you got to follow these. If you want to follow me, here are the rules. You want to follow, you want to get to heaven, you want to get to the kingdom. This is what you got to do, and that's 180 degrees out of phase from modern day Christianity, which is hugely, no, not hugely. I'm doing it. I'm doing the words a disservice. Completely based on obedience.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is with gnosis.
The whole system. That's a really good point. I'm sorry, Derek, for interrupting.
Go ahead, man. Go ahead. Rock on.
Highlight the entire system. I talk a lot about sin, fall, and redemption, but at the end of the day, sin is disobedience, right? Yep. So the entire system is based on this concept of obedience, and Gnosticism completely flips that on its head and completely undoes all of that. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. Like, man, the entire system of religion, think about that. I'm just growing in real time again. Think about that. Yeah. The entire system is based on your obedience.
Your obedience. And this is another reason why I think Gnosticism was branded as a heresy, because it could not be religioized. I know that's probably not a word, but I'm making it a word for this discussion.
It would be, you could say it'd be really hard to weaponize it.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, because it's like everything is local. The whole point of gnosis is local. It's not a global thing. Now, where it does become global is when we start looking at this in a broader spiritual context, that if everyone were in gnosis and instead of obedience, then maybe something would be unleashed in a global consciousness that would transform humanity. So the thing is that if we could just get to the point where we're not, fuck obedience. Honestly, just fuck obedience, and fuck the commandments, fuck the commands, fuck everything that Paul said you have to do, and fuck all of that, and just say, okay, what do I need to know to tap into and unleash the power in me? Now, if I'm doing this and I'm teaching others to do this, I mean, let's use this as an anti-proselytizing paradigm, because we're not trying to convince anyone to accept this paradigm.
Correct.
We're demonstrating it by example. So when people see I've tapped into this knowledge, and this tapping into this inner knowledge has granted me peace, is granted me health, is granted me stability, is granted me financial, all of the basic things that we say are pertaining to life and godliness, that we achieve these through knowledge, not by obedience. And let me just say this about that, right? Because this is something that really turns my fucking crank. And it's this. People say, if you just trust God and keep his commandments, that you too will be blessed. But I see people, I was in ministry for 30 years and I've seen people, I've seen people keep God's commandments in ways that I couldn't even comprehend. I saw them, that they were faithful, that their financial habits, their sexual habits, and again, you don't know what people are doing behind closed doors, but I'm saying on the surface or what you could see, these people were like, whew, I mean, they love God, right? And yet and still, there were people that were not keeping it perfectly. In fact, there were people that were completely perverting it. They were prospering. And so this says that obedience is not the key. It can't be, because if everyone who was obedient, listen, if you looked at this and you say, okay, believe on the Lord Jesus and you'll be saved. Okay, great. I believe on Jesus. I trust him I love him with my whole heart. I trust him with my life. Right. And you say this and you mean it honestly, but you go out into the world and you get beat down, you get kicked in the nuts, you get dragged through the mud, your reputation is maligned, everything is fucked up. And you're like, well, God, I'm one of your children. Can you at least not pass, like that song, while on others thou art calling, do not pass me by. Jesus, he's coming by, he's got a blessing for you, but you don't get this blessing. But you're keeping the commands, you're doing everything right. And so if you look at it from that standpoint, I always say that the greatest billboard advertisement for God would be that if everybody who got saved, immediately their lives got better.
Mm-hmm. Well, come on. Didn't you ever remember, what was that show? Facing the Giants? That's what happened in Facing the Giants.
Yeah.
I'm messing. Do you remember that movie? Yep. Like they won the football game. The couple conceived their first child. I mean, they put it out there like that's how it works.
Yeah, but it doesn't. I mean, and again, this is one of those things where somebody can have an experience, and you can't discount that experience. That experience is their experience, right? But when you look at it as a paradigm, something that a pattern that could be followed or otherwise replicated by someone else, it doesn't happen.
Right.
And that's the problem. So when we start talking about knowledge versus obedience, I think that the key to this is understanding what is in us. I'll go back to 7 years ago when I had my heart issue. People would say, "Oh, we're going to pray for you, Pastor. We're going to pray for you." I'm like, "No, just hold off on that." And people kind of got mad at me when they said, "What? You don't think my prayers are good enough?" I said, "No, that's not it." I said, "I need to find out what this is. This is something personal for me. You can't help me with this."
Yeah.
And so I began to dig into, okay, when someone is diagnosed with heart failure, what does that mean? What are some of the things that that this means to your life? What are some of the things that you could do to mitigate this? What are there cases of anyone that's being healed from this? And you just went through this not too long ago. So the same thing. It's like you, in order to, or let me give another example. I'm in this situation now where I've lost over 50 pounds. I'm like at 55 pounds lost now, right? Yeah. And that isn't from hoping and wishing and praying. It's from taking a scientific approach and understanding what's within me. Right. Because if I don't understand what's within me, then all of the understanding of the world is not going to help me. I have to learn how to apply this to what's in me, and apply what's in me to this this science or whatever, in order to get a result. So the key then is that obedience is a crapshoot. It's like standing at the crap table in Vegas and hoping for a 7, right? It may or may not come. But if you go into knowledge and you say, okay, this is what I know. now you can raise your statistics, the probability of success higher, because you're basing it on something that's tangible, measurable, and repeatable versus what is intangible. So anyway, so that's why I think knowledge is superior. And even when we get into matters of spirituality, right? You know, like you said before that you couldn't be an atheist because of the experiences that you had. Those, nobody could take those experiences from you. But when you talk about scaling, you can't scale out those experiences and say, okay, I got this experience this way, you can get this experience that way.
I would nuance that a little bit. I would nuance that from this perspective.
Okay.
I think the obedience thing is really key. And I'm going to build on something that you said. You know, we're saying that through this self-knowledge, you can find inner peace. Through this self-knowledge, you can find health and healing. Through this self-knowledge, you can find, you know, it can improve your finances, all things that pertain to life and godliness, right? So I would argue that, and I'm going to do an episode. I've asked some people that were part of my church from the very, very, very beginning if they would do an episode with me and just talk about what their experiences were like, because I have come to realize that we were not your run-of-the-mill Christian church at all, by any means, ever. And we were more Gnostic than anything else. And so I can say with certainty that by applying these inner principles, that people were able to replicate over and over and over again.
Yeah.
A lot of, you know, my experiences were. They wouldn't be the same, clearly, the same kinds of experiences, but I could go into a meeting, and we've talked about this, and I'm not bragging on myself, but I just want people to understand experiences that could mean anything.
Yep.
I could go into a meeting with 10 people, and I could look at someone and know the condition in their body and transfer energy to them. And 99% of the time, if I could see what was wrong with them, they'd be healed. Maybe it's not that high, but it was pretty consistent.
Yeah.
So 10 people, right? I could go into an audience of 10,000 people, which I did on several occasions, and get information that was so specific that it would only apply to one person out of that 10,000 in that audience.
Yeah.
And then they would, you know, they would be able to receive. And then what I was able to do was I was able to teach other people how I did that. So then pretty soon in a small group, you know, if we had 20, 30 people, they would be able to apply that same kind of words of knowledge and stuff by just teaching them what I did. So I think there is a replicating dynamic within Gnosticism itself.
Yeah.
Difference that I'm hearing you say, and that I think we need to emphasize, is we weren't teaching anyone be obedient to this. It wasn't about that at all.
No, it's knowledge. It's understanding.
So when we start trying to export obedience, that's when I think we get in trouble. I don't think people mind if you're like sharing ideas and sharing principles and things that can help them. Otherwise, you know, the self-help industry wouldn't be a multi-million dollar or billion-dollar industry, right?
Yep.
I don't think they mind that, but it's when we're demanding you have to think like me, you have to see it like me. My experiences are better than yours, or I have more authority. I have that direct line. Look, I just called, you know, I just read this person's mail, like literally, not generally, but specifically on this day, this occurred to you and caused this, and this is going to happen to you, right? Okay. And then, oh, wow, that's amazing. I've never seen anything like that. Wow, you must have a direct line to God. And then the next thing you know, I'm building a cult or a kingdom unto myself based on obedience and devotion to Aaron. You know what I mean? And that shit happens all the time, even with people that can demonstrate anything that delivers anything of value or benefit to others.
Let me say this, that when you veer into the obedience column, you veer out of the knowledge column, and now you've left Gnosticism.
Absolutely. So knowledge is the answer. It's the I don't know. I'm really getting this. I mean, it's so obvious, but I'm really seeing this in a different light. Like, knowledge is the antidote.
Yep.
Knowledge is the antidote.
And that takes me to the last point here, is like Jesus as enlightener versus savior. And I think that this is where a lot of people are either going to be forced to think, or they're going to be forced to bail, right?
Yeah.
Because if you say, okay, Jesus is my savior, he saved me from what? Right? That's the big question. And a lot of people can't answer that question, because if you look at it, if you're going to be intellectually honest, you're saying that Jesus saved you from God. That's the intellectually honest answer.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
But if you say Jesus was the enlightener, that he brought me some truth, he brought me some knowledge, some understanding that I lacked, and this helped me to see something in myself, because again, it's God within, it's personal salvation,
Right.
it's inner knowledge.
Right.
And if Jesus is the revealer of that, then I've been enlightened by him, and I've been brought to knowledge by him. Now my relationship with him changes, because I'm not looking at him as this life preserver that was thrown to me while I was drowning in my sins,
In your disobedience.
in my disobedience. Yeah. Come on, man.
Damn.
But instead, he's enlightening me. He's sparking an incandescence in me. Now, and not to say that it didn't exist in me. I had this equipment from the factory. I simply didn't know how.
Right.
And again, to go back to my Tesla example, I got a software download that allows me to move the passenger seat forward or backward from the driver's seat. I don't have to reach over to the side of the seat or go over to the passenger side and move the seat. I can move it from the comfort of my driver's seat, right? That functionality existed. It just needed the software to trigger it.
Sure.
So when we talk about Jesus as enlightener, think of Jesus as this cloud entity from which we're able to download upgrades to our mind and spirit, that helps us to actuate things that are already within us. And if we see that, and we take away the savior paradigm, now we see, okay, Jesus is not the rock of my salvation. Jesus is the source of my spiritual knowledge. He becomes my spiritual conduit that connects me to God.
If we were in a Pentecostal church, I'd be running around dancing right now. You're speaking my language.
Now, if we were in a Pentecostal church, I'd be looking for the plate to be passed around right about now. Because Jesus gives me knowledge on how to get money.
Yeah, it's true. That's good stuff. So we've been at this about, I don't know, an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's probably a good place to look at questions and start answering.
We said we were going to talk about Gnosticism as subversive, but I think we should come back and talk about that next week and do a whole episode to develop that, because that is definitely a component.
That's huge.
That's in Gnosticism everywhere that I love. And, I love talking about that stuff. So,
Yep.
So I don't know. Where do you want to go from here? I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, like one of the things that I want to do is talk to the audience, right?
Yep.
If you've awakened to Gnosticism, what woke you up? What triggered the awakening in you, the quickening in you? What's your gnosis? Because the thing is that I believe that gnosis is personal, but I think that personal gnosis can scale to global gnosis. That's my take. I could be wrong, but what's your gnosis? What is it that what is it that you know? What is it that that God or spirit or source has shown you, right? The next thing is have you been exiled by orthodoxy? Oh my God. Listen, I'm going to tell you something. I had a incident. Well, not an incident. I don't want to call it that, but a friend of mine attacked, or didn't attack, but he was like kind of shit on another friend of mine, right? So this one friend of mine is a Christian pastor, and I support him. It's like when this guy goes to preach, I come out and I watch. Because just like how I like slam poetry and beatnik shit, I also like preaching in the same way. And good preaching to me is an oratory gift.
Yep.
So there are some people that they preach, and I'm all in. I don't necessarily believe what they believe, but it's like the gift that they have is like going to watch a fucking concert or a stand-up comedy act. Is going to see somebody that has a talent.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, this particular guy never left me nor forsook me. When I left and when I became an inclusionist / universalist, a preterist, ultimately an atheist, and then coming back to being an anti-theist, an agnostic anti-theist, right? Never left me. Still one of my best friends. You know who he is, by the way, but that's another thing. But I've been exiled. I've been completely cast out. There are people that have told me they are afraid to talk to me because of what they are afraid of what God will do to them for having communion and fellowship with me. So
greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world, brother. Let's sit down.
Listen.
Let's sit down and have coffee. Greater is he that's in you.
Yeah. I mean, but no, you're afraid that God's gonna strike you down, he's gonna give you boils and plagues and all of that shit, But okay, wow. And then last for all of you that are watching, you guys have me and Aaron's Facebook inboxes. Feel free to inbox us.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, Aaron, we'll get an actual email and website and all of that, and we'll be able to look at these things in a broader sense. And some of the things that we're going to do is like get a Discord group going on, and where people can talk about this, because listen, we all have questions, and this is what I want. My challenge to everybody is be open-minded. An open mind will make you agile and flexible. When you think that your way is the way, at that point you're galvanized. And here's the thing about becoming galvanized in thought is that when a superior paradigm comes, and it will, instead of you bending and being flexible and easing into this thing, you could easily be broken. And your whole life's paradigm can be fucked up. And I don't want to see that happen to anybody. I would rather you go through this, ease into this, and look at this from a logical standpoint and say, okay, this makes sense or it doesn't. And I'm going to give a shout out to our friend and brother Jeff Turner. Because again, Jeff was pastoring one of the largest churches in Southeast Michigan, and he had a faith crisis, and he went all the way into atheism.
He did,
and came out and said that I have a pure, more useful, practical faith. Coming out. And although I don't agree with Jeff as to where he landed faith-wise, I have absolute admiration and respect for him. Because what he came out with was, he said, this is a faith that doesn't require proselytizing. I don't have to tell anybody about what I believe. All I have to do is just share, what I know.
Yeah, I share that respect and admiration for Jeff. For one thing, he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. I mean, that dude is fucking brilliant. And yeah, he did. I shared a post that he put, and
I saw that.
Yeah, and it's important that we don't make assumptions about people. When we see something on Facebook, it's important we don't make assumptions. I'll just say that, leave it at that. But yeah, amen. Good stuff.
Amen.
Yeah. Hey man, you're gonna have to deal with me because I'm something's going on. I can't explain it. I just know something's stirring in me and changing in me. So,
Well, let me say
and
this.
I may end up like Jeff.
No, and that's fine, Aaron. You know, brother, I love you
Oh, I
for
know
who
you.
you are.
I know you do,
Um,
but
but let me say this. Let me say this about me is that, you know, I see things spiritually that I didn't see before.
mm-hmm.
And but the difference I think between you and I is this, that for me, I think that gnosis, that, you know, quantum physics, these are the string theory. These are things that are going to ultimately help me, uh, you know, build some guardrails, or not only say guardrails, but to help me to corral what it is that I you know that I'm believing, and and so I would say clearly I'm not an atheist anymore. But what I will say is that what I know about the Bible, what I know about Christian, I could never go back to that again.
Yeah, me too. And let me say it this way, and it's hard for people. This is where I'm struggling, Derek, and just to
Yeah,
get real personal with the audience, right? This
yeah,
is
that's
usually
cool.
something I'd save for the after show. But I have been it's difficult for me because it's hard for me to find language to speak about where I'm at and what I believe. It really is, because when I
Yeah.
use the language that I prefer, that I'm comfortable with, it is Christian language. Now, why is that? Because I spent 30 freaking years
Yeah.
using that language to describe what the things that I experience. And so,
Can I interject something real quick right there?
yeah,
Because this is a conversation that you and I have. Because when we first started doing phreology, we are like, okay, we don't want to do we're not going to do anything biblical. But then you said this. You said, you know, Derek, we've got 30 years in this game. We've invested time, talent, treasure in this. Why should we be forced to just shit can what we've learned?
right.
And that was a very big turning point for me, because at that point I said, okay, you're onto something. You know, why can't we discuss something scripturally, but unpack it in a different way, because we've studied it, we've earned it.
Mhm.
But keep going, please.
Well, so what I can say is, since childhood, I have been, this is going to upset people, freak people out, but I would say it this way: I have been in a loving relationship, not romantically, not sexually. I took some shots at that. The worship music, like, anyway, in one of my videos. But I've had a loving relationship with a higher power that I would call spirit my entire life.
Yep.
And what's fascinating to me was that relationship was in place before I became indoctrinated in Christian thinking. And then, as hard as I try, and this is crazy, I tried really, really, really hard to get away from that. And I can't. Now, people can do with that what they want. People say, well, no, that's just an aspect of you. That's just your higher self. I don't know how you would know that. People that would say that to me, how do you know that? You don't even ask questions. And this is where I think people get stuck in a reaction formation.
Yeah.
I'll share that. I've been in a loving relationship with spirit, and immediately all I get is pushback. Well, no, that's your higher self. Well, no, that's
No,
the greater universal mind. But they don't ask questions, which means they presume to know me better than I know myself.
right.
And that is the epitome of arrogance.
Or they have a better understanding of your experience than you do.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
like immediately, right off the bat. So that is a psychological reaction formation, because I've made up my mind there is no higher power out there. I've made up my mind there is nothing transcendent. I've made up my mind materialism is all there is. And if I say something along those lines, I'm challenging it. And so therefore they're reacting to me
Yeah.
rather than listening to me.
Right.
But
And
it's a challenge. It's a challenge to be where I'm at right now.
but I have to say this, and I have to give you a shout out here, because where I am right now, like I said, there are three people in my life who have helped me to be where I am right now. That's you, it's my sister Sandra, and my wife. And because of the three of you, I see there's a possibility of something greater than me. I don't dismiss it. Now, what I do dismiss, I dismiss the God of the Bible completely.
Yeah, I mean,
I dismiss the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So whether it's Islam, Judaism, Christianity, I don't give a fuck. I dismiss all of it.
right.
But there is the possibility of something greater. There is something that connects us, something that moves us, something that it's something greater, whether it's something that's intimately involved with us or loves us or anything that I don't know. I can't say that, but I can say that I'm okay with the possibility of something greater than me existing,
Right.
and I'm okay with that. I don't know. I'm good, and like I said, I owe you a debt of gratitude for that. You and my sister and my wife.
Yeah.
Because between the three of you, you guys helped me to see, because I was really comfortable in my atheism. I was very comfortable in my atheism.
I know.
But,
And it's fine. See, here's the thing. Like, I do believe in God. I do. I absolutely do.
yeah.
But I do not believe that the purpose of this life is to find God.
No.
I really don't.
Because if that's the case, God is a narcissist.
Then there's a problem. There's a huge problem. And so all the arguments, if God was real, what'd you put out? I saw something, or maybe you said it tonight. If God was real, basically prove himself to everybody that he was real. That presupposes that the goal of this life is to find God or have relationship with God. And I don't believe that at all.
No.
I don't know all the ins and outs of the purpose of everybody else's life, but I am coming to strong clarity and congruence about what the purpose of my life is. And that's all that matters.
And let me say this. To you and to everybody. I don't believe that anybody has a specific purpose. I think that that's too narrow. I think that all of us have a wondrous amount of probability.
I'm going to tell you right now, Derek, there is a purpose that I have kicked against, fought against, a fire that I've tried to put out. I have tried every way possibly that I know to just be a regular dude, and it ain't working. Whatever this is,
the probability of you being that thing.
No, it's a purpose. It's a purpose. Now, you may not have one. Tommy may not have one. Jimmy may not have one. I have tried, brothers. I have tried. And it won't leave me alone.
I'll let you go.
And I have to surrender to it. I have to submit to it. So that's just is what it is for me. That's what it is.
Okay. Well, for me, I have a benediction for this church service.
What's that?
May you question what you were told and remember what you always knew.
Oh, I love that. That's good. I love that. I really love that.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Let's keep our minds open, be mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally agile and flexible. That we recognize that we all have the right to question everything.
Absolutely. And I don't think purpose is a thing that people should struggle with. I think that can be super toxic for people as well. I'm just saying in my case, for whatever reason, like, it just keeps beating down my door.
Well, you might be one of the few.
Maybe, I don't know. I have no idea.
But I tell you what, this was really excellent, and I'm really looking forward to going down the Gnostic rabbit hole and helping. And again, like at the end of the day, I'm a humanist. I really believe what can we do to invoke the higher good of humanity, and if this is one of these ways, let's go.
I agree, bro. Thank you. I appreciate you. I really do.
I appreciate you, man.
The best friend in the world, man. Honestly.
Yeah, I mean, you are one of my best friends, and you're definitely one of my heroes, man. And I'm gonna tell you, and I'll tell everybody else, I wouldn't be standing here today hadn't it been for you.
Thank you, man. Appreciate that. All right. So I don't know. What are we going to use for how are we going to close these shows?
Well, I just did this benediction. May you question what you were told.
Oh,
and remember what you always knew.
That's the benediction.
That's the benediction. This is how we close church service.
May question what you were told and remember what you always knew. Is that it?
That's it, man.
Love it.
That's it. That's our benediction. That's how we say church is over.
All right, everybody. We will see you. We'll be back next week, I think.
Yep.
Lord willing.
Lord willing, and the creek don't rise.
I'll be back. People were like, what happened to Aaron? Yeah, we'll see you next week, guys. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and give us some feedback on this. It would be really valuable. Let us know what you thought, what you'd like to hear. So, yeah, appreciate everybody for watching by replay.
Oh, one quick thing I want to say. Is there anybody that sends any questions? And we're going to do a Q&A segment at the end of every show, and we'll answer your questions.